Hi, I'm Ross Wright, the Executive Director of Hope at Home, and we're talking about how to survive the foster parent life cycle. A dear friend of mine, Brian, once said to me, I would have gone through it with a lot more grace had I been prepared. So that's what my job is today, is to prepare you for the foster parent life cycle so that you can go through it with a lot more grace. Okay, let's talk about what it's like to be a foster parent and what these cycles are. In the beginning, when you first think you're going to be a foster parent, you first start talking about it with your friends, you first start exploring it, it's all very, very exciting. And what we know about life is that happiness equals reality minus expectations. I'm going to say that again. Happiness equals reality minus expectations. So if our reality is greater than our expectations, we're usually happy. If our expectations are higher than our reality, we're usually disappointed. In the beginning stages of being a foster parent, when you're first finding out about it, you're going around to different places, you're exploring, you're asking about it, people are recruiting you potentially. During that stage, it's a lot of excitement. There is no reality, it's all expectations. And most foster parents say that during that stage, they're the happiest. They're just finding out about it, they're thinking about the possibilities, they're thinking about the impact on their family, and then they start to get involved. They start going to classes, and usually classes are kind of fun. They do a home study. And when you're doing your home study, it's kind of exciting. It's a little bit like being a celebrity. People are interviewing you and asking you questions. You and your spouse sit side by side on a couch and they're asking you questions about how did you first meet and how did you know you were in love and how many kids did you want to have? All these kinds of questions. You feel like a little bit of a celebrity, a little bit of a rock star. And at the same time, you're getting your house ready. You're buying cribs and different kinds of things, and you're imagining the future. So again, if we think about happiness equals reality minus expectations, in the beginning stages, in stage one of being a foster parent, it's all expectations. There is no reality. So it's all excitement. Okay, then what happens? Stage two of being a foster parent, placement. That means you're certified, you get a phone call, usually late at night, and suddenly a child is placed with you. This is stage two. Guess what? This is all reality. Okay? When we talk about happiness equals reality minus expectations, that phone call in the middle of the night, it's all reality. So now you're diving into the reality of being a foster parent. And while it's exciting, and while it's invigorating, and while it's kind of a dream come true to you, it's also filled with all kinds of tough realities. Lack of sleep. You kind of forgot what it was like to have a baby in your home. Lack of sleep. Having to be places all the time, going on appointments, having GALs, guardian ad litems, having CASAs, court appointed special advocates, having caseworkers all in your life. This is all new stuff. And what most foster parents say is after the first initial excitement of having a child placed in your home, there's this kind of sense of disappointment and frustration, and it feels kind of negative. It feels kind of like, wow, this is a lot harder than we expected. Again, happiness equals reality minus expectations. And if this is harder than we expected, then all of a sudden we're not happy. All of a sudden we're feeling very worn out, frustrated, and maybe even a little bit angry because things aren't the way we expected them. And during that period of time, it's not unusual to get mad at people, to get frustrated, to feel like people didn't tell you enough in the beginning. It's not unusual to be a little bit bitter even. Frustrated, bitter, angry. These are the normal reactions after placement. The third stage is called ongoing. Okay, now the placement has happened and you've had court hearings and you're getting to know the child that's in your home or the children that's in your home. You're getting to understand what's going on with the case. Usually by this time you have gotten over the challenges of the child. And what I mean by that is if it's a baby, you're over the challenges of how to maintain a baby in your home. You're over the challenges of how to diaper and how to be up all night. And now the challenges in your life are the system. So the third stage is when you're pretty much comfortable with the children in your home, but you're really uncomfortable with the professionals in your home. So stage one is all anticipation, is the pre-licensure stage. Stage two, you're licensed and a child is placed in your home and your life as you know it on this earth has changed permanently and you're frustrated, you're tired, and you're worn out. Stage three, if you've kind of gotten through that, you're no longer so tired, you've got a pattern going, you got systems, you got schedules, you hopefully have people helping you make appointments and pick kids up and that sort of stuff. Now you're frustrated with the system. And honestly, it's a tough and it's a frustrating system. And most of the time you're warned about this going into foster care. But it doesn't make it any easier. Suddenly you have a bunch of different kinds of folks tugging on you and pushing on you and trying to get you to do different things, and schedules that don't seem like they make sense, and sometimes schedules that don't make sense. Sometimes schedules that overlap each other, appointments that are on top of each other, people calling you at the last minute needing things from you. All of a sudden you start finding yourself very, very frustrated with the system. What is stage four? Stage four is when all of this is done and you're finally at a point where you feel like it all kind of makes sense and the case resolves. Okay, so stage four is the resolution of the case. And what can that be? That can be that you adopt. It can be the child is returned home. It could be that the child is returned to a relative but not home. So at this point in time, when the case resolves, it's up to you as a foster parent in stage four to say, what next? Am I ready to return and do it again? Or have I had enough and it's time to leave? Depending on how you manage each one of these four stages, you're going to either feel like, I got to get the heck out of here, or I'm ready to do it again. Again, the success of a foster parent depends mostly on how they go into these four stages, how they handle these four stages, and when the four stages are over, whether they feel like they can do it again is usually dependent on their expectations minus reality. Okay, were you happy with what happened, or are you unhappy with what happened? During that last stage, when the case is resolved, it's a time to reflect, it's time to refresh, and it's time to decide whether or not you want to return. Most foster parents do. Some foster parents say, no, I'm out of here. I'm miserable. This was a terrible experience. And usually when they bail out at that point, there's a sense of being angry and feeling like the system is really broken. They want to write letters. They want to get upset about things. They want to blame people. But in reality, most of the time, that sense comes from not being prepared for these four stages. So like my friend Brian said, if you're prepared for this, you're going to go through these four stages with a lot more grace. And when you get to the end, you're going to be a lot more prepared to return. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the other things that happens during these four stages. Right after Vietnam, a number of soldiers returned to the United States, and it's an unusual circumstance because here were these wounded warriors who ended up living with and seeking out a bunch of nurturing people. And these nurturing people, social workers, nurses, took in these wounded warriors and fell in love with them and found that they were getting more and more frustrated as time went by. Here I am, a hero, I'm a nurse, I'm a social worker, I took in a wounded warrior, and I'm doing everything I can for this person. I'm trying to be this person's hero. And then what happens is after a while, you start getting really frustrated. I'm trying to be this person's hero, and they don't care. They're unhappy. They're miserable. They're drinking, perhaps. They're lazy. They don't pick up their underwear. All these things that really frustrate me. And here I am trying to be this person's hero. Well, what they discovered is a trauma triangle was occurring. And this was a phenomenon we first discovered after Vietnam, but it really has existed since probably the beginning of time. It probably existed from the day that a caveman went out and did battle against the dinosaur and came back, and the person tried to nurture that person, and we went through this trauma triangle. So what is the trauma triangle? The trauma triangle starts out with someone stepping into a relationship with someone and trying to be their hero, be their savior. And after a period of time, starting to feel like you're taking advantage of me. And now I'm starting to feel a little bit like a victim. And after I've been a victim for a while, I start to get angry and I start to get frustrated and I start to attack. And now I become your perpetrator. And we see this trauma triangle play out in families all the time. A child will, in a family where the mother and father are separated, they'll be with dad, and dad will be the hero because dad got him away from mom and mom was being a jerk. And so dad then is this hero to this child, and after a while feels like, hey, I did all this stuff for you and you're really disrespecting me. So I start to feel like a victim. Then after a while, I'm done with you because you've taken advantage of me for so long. And so I start to antagonize you and kind of attack you. And then you start feeling like a victim. So what do? You say, I'm going to mom's. And you go to mom, and now mom's the hero until she becomes the victim. And after a while, she starts to become the nag, and then she becomes the perpetrator. Then you go to dad. A lot of families see this play out over and over again. And my guess is you know somebody in your family where this has happened, whether it's with mom and dad or it's with different relatives, or maybe even with grown children that go from family to family to family, seeking out a hero, turning them into a victim, and then ultimately feeling perpetrated by that person and wanting to give up. Well, if we overlay this trauma triangle onto the 4 stages of foster care, we can see how nice and neatly it fits. In the beginning stages, we're the hero. We're stepping into a situation where we're going to rescue a child, and we're all excited about being the hero. Then what happens? Well, the child has had real stuff happen to that child. That child had reasons for removal. That child, through the process of removal, had a tremendous amount of trauma just there itself. So let's think about that. Not only does the child have the trauma that caused the removal itself, having people come in and take you away from your family, causes trauma. So this child ends up now in your family, and while you're feeling like a hero, what are they feeling like? They're feeling kind of like bruised and beaten up, and they're miserable, and they're probably not going to treat you like you're this wonderful hero. In fact, they're missing their family. They might even treat you kind of poorly. So the second this child lands in your home, if it's a baby, they're crying. If it's a young child, they're upset that they lost their mom, dad, and their family. If they're a teen, they could be even more upset because they understand more. So all of a sudden you have this child in your home that isn't treating you like a hero, isn't looking up to you and saying, thank you for having rescued me, is probably upset, feeling very much displaced, wondering where their family is, and probably even angry at you, even though that anger is not appropriate. They're angry at you because they see you as the person that caused this. So stage 2 is, gosh, I'm starting to feel like a victim. I started out feeling like a hero, now I feel like a victim. And after a while, our self-defense systems kick in, and we stop being victims, and we start attacking the child. We start getting mad at the child. We start getting mad at the system. So this layers on very well to the 4 stages of being a foster parent. The first part of being a foster parent is being a hero. That layers on perfectly with the trauma triangle, because obviously the first step there is being a hero. Then you have your first placement, you're worn out, you're exhausted, and you're feeling a little bit victimized. And then the third stage, you're starting to feel like a little bit of a perpetrator because you're angry at the world or angry at the child, and you want the child out. Now here's where it gets really interesting. You as a foster parent have a challenge. You're going to go through stage 1 and you're going to go through stage 2. You have a choice when you hit stage 3. After you felt like a hero, after you felt like a victim, you choose whether or not you're going to turn into a perpetrator. The goal is step outside of the triangle. Stop playing these roles. We stop pretending that we're heroes and stop acting like rescuers and realize we're dealing with real life children, real life situations, and real people. And we simply step in and try and do the best we can as a caregiver. And we recognize that their needs are significant and we're going to help them through those needs. And we're making the world a little bit better place, but we don't need for us to feel like we are victims, and we don't need to feel like perpetrators. Then we get to stage 3 of being a foster parent. I realize I'm going back and forth between the stages, but when we get to stage 3 of being a foster parent, that frustration with the system, it's a little bit less now, because if we can no longer see ourselves as being victims, then we don't have to be perpetrators. We can just deal with a very frustrating system. Now let's take a moment and skip over to another diagram, and this diagram talks about what it's like to be a missionary, because it layers on top of both of these very well. Let's think about being a missionary. You decided that you want to get involved. Maybe someone came and did a presentation to your church or your school, and you're thinking, I want to go to Egypt. I want to make a difference. I want to go to Indonesia, or I want to go to Africa. And the first stage, just like the first stage of parenting, and the first stage of foster parent, and like the first stage of being a hero, is all exciting, right? Because you start reading about the place that you're going, you start talking to people who've been there, you start imagining what it's like, you get all excited. The first stage of being a missionary is the pre-mission stage of getting ready. And guess what? It's all about you. Just like the first stage of being a foster parent, it's all about you. When you're a foster parent and you're first starting out, well, we got to get you home studied, and we have to go to your house, and we have to have these questions for you. Well, the first stage of being a missionary is the same. We have to pick out where we're going to go. We have to raise our support. We have to get shots done. It's all about us. And so that's obviously very exciting, and the expectations are high. Because remember, happiness equals reality minus expectations. In the first stage of being a missionary, it's all about the expectations. It's all exciting. There is no reality until you land in the mission field. The second stage of being a missionary is landing in the mission field. So suddenly you've landed wherever you're going, whether it's Africa or Indonesia or maybe Russia. And all of a sudden you discover things. One, they don't speak English. Number two, if you're in Russia, it's dang cold. And three, there's this thing called the KGB. All these things make life difficult, and the mission field is always challenging. They don't have transportation. They don't have places for you to live like you thought they're going to be. How do you eat the food? What kind of food should you eat? What kind of food makes you sick? Most missionaries get sick right away. This is a tough start. And so when you land in the mission field, there's that same level of disappointment. Again, happiness equals reality minus expectations. When you first land in the mission field, it's all reality, and the reality is not meeting expectations. It may be wild, it may be exotic, it may be interesting, it may be fulfilling, but at the same time, it's obviously going to be different, and oftentimes different is uncomfortable. So when we land in the mission field, we have to manage our way through the mission field. Successful missionaries do that. Successful foster parents do that. They get through stage 2, okay? And so we want to help you get through stage 2. We want to get you through the part where everything's uncomfortable, out of sorts, and you're doing lots of visits and all kinds of things that are uncomfortable and difficult, and you're no longer the hero. When you're a missionary and you land in the mission field, all those accolades you leave behind in the United States, all the people that say you're going to be amazing and you're going to do wonderful things, goes away. And most of the time when missionaries land in the mission field, they discover that the people that are doing mission work don't necessarily want them there. And sometimes we've seen worse things happen. I mean, Christians throughout the world have had their heads cut off on the mission field, or they've died of malaria. So the mission field is dangerous. The mission field is difficult. The mission field is tricky. Same thing in foster care. Stage 2 of foster parenting, when the placement occurs, is like landing in the mission field. You've got a tough mission. You've got to navigate guardian ad litems, respondent attorneys, caseworkers, judges, FSPs, family service plans. All these things come at you. They're the mission field, and they're tough. So what's the third stage of a missionary? First stage is pre-mission, it's excitement. Second stage is landing in the mission field and being overwhelmed by the field itself. The third stage, if you can manage it and get past the frustrations of the mission field, is the mission itself. Same thing with foster parent. Once you've gotten past the excitement of the beginning and the pre-certification stage, once you've gotten past number 2, which is the placement process, landing in the mission field, now you get to do the mission. And for foster parents, that's the child you're taking care of. This is where all the joy and excitement comes in. This is where you get to make a difference in a child's life. This is exciting. This is the mission itself. And once we get to the mission itself, if we can embrace it, and tolerate the mission field, tolerate all the systems issues and all the difficulties of having kids in your home, this is where it all becomes fun. This is where happiness equals reality minus expectations. This is where happiness occurs because the reality starts to be fun. We've minimized the mission field. We're no longer fighting with the system. We're no longer objecting to all the rules and everything that's going on. We're now understanding the rules and we're doing well with them and we're moving on. So stage 3 of being a foster parent, like stage 3 of a missionary, is diving into the children and the mission themselves. How do you know when you're at stage 3? Simple. When your daily conversation is about the child and the joy you have in making the child's life better, not complaining all the time about the system and the government and how they don't get it and how they're doing things that you don't agree with and that you don't approve. Once you get past that, the joy comes in. Once you get to where you're working specifically with the child, joy comes in. Then, when you reach the 4th stage, the resolution of the case, you're ready to return. Whether you adopt that child or send that child back home, you're not bitter, you're not frustrated, you're not angry, you're not worn out. You're the missionary that now is able to refresh, reflect, and return. Okay, a lot of information all at once, but let's break it down to 3 or 4 lessons. Lesson number 1, what can you do as a foster parent to survive this process? What can you do to survive the foster parent cycle, the 4 stages? Number 1, learn about them. Be forewarned. Like my friend Brian said, if you know this is going to happen, you know that each stage is a season and it will end. So as you're going through it, if you are forewarned, you are forearmed, you're ready for it. You're thinking ahead of it. You know it's coming. And one of you is reacting to the mission field. The other one can say, remember what Ross said on that video? This is to be expected and it will pass. So number one, be forewarned, be forearmed. Number two, make sure that you have a strong support group around you. This is important. At Hope and Home, we have over 15 support groups that go on every single month, and our foster parents can attend as many or as little as they want to. They can just come to one. We do require they come to one because that support is so important, or they can come to as many as they need. During times of trouble, it's not unusual for foster parents to go to multiple support groups. And when I say times of trouble, it's when they're usually in stage 2, and they're trying to get to stage 3, and they're struggling with it, and they need the support. So number 2, find support. What I'm going to warn you about, though, is if you have people in your life who are naysayers, if you have people in your life who from the very beginning were negative about you getting into foster care, those are not your support people. Okay, let me say that again. If you have people in your life that have been negative about you getting into foster care or have been naysayers about the whole process from the very beginning, those are not your support people. Because if you go back to those folks, what are they going to do? They're going to tell you, see, I told you so, and you shouldn't be doing this, and they're going to make you feel even worse about where you are in foster care. Your support group needs to be positive and able to support you. Number 3, learn. Learn about the system. Understand the system. When I was young, I went to my first court case, and I watched as an attorney just fought with another attorney. These attorneys were just fighting, and I was on one side. I wanted the one side to win. And I watched this other attorney just attack everybody on that side. And it was just awful. And I thought that attorney was kind of an evil guy for attacking the good guys on the other side. Well, guess what? When the case was over, the attorneys go to lunch. I later found out they play basketball together. What I found out was this isn't personal. These people are just doing their jobs. When we understand the different roles of the different people on the case, then we don't take it personally. We understand this is their job, and we don't get upset about it the same way. We don't feel threatened in the same way. We understand that this is their job. We understand what their jobs are. We understand what their roles are. It makes it a whole lot easier. Number 4, this is the biggest one of all. You need to become centered or tethered. What do we mean by centered or tethered? Soren Kierkegaard, who was a Christian existentialist of the last generation, talked about this at length. He talked about the importance of living your life tethered, in his case, tethered to Christ. He said, when I feel tethered, I don't feel battered and pushed all around by the world that I'm in. He gives the example of a cork in the ocean and how that cork is thrown all over the place when the waves hit. And when storms come, how that cork is really thrown all over the place. Of course, he's talking about the storms that we experience in life and the ups and downs that we experience in life and how they throw us all over the place. But he compares that cork to a buoy that is anchored to the ocean floor. That buoy doesn't move. He says that's like being in a relationship with Christ. When I am anchored to Christ, I'm not thrown all around by the world. Yes, there's a lot of bad things that happen. There's sickness and illness and crime and violence and poverty. And he says as each one of those things affects our lives, it's dramatic, but it doesn't undo us because we're anchored. Becoming anchored is a very, very important thing in foster care, because what you don't want to do is find yourself thrown all over the place every time there's a wave or a storm. Every time something happens in the courtroom, you come out of the courtroom furious and upset, and then the next moment you find out something else and you're excited and happy, and then you find out something else and you're upset. This is the sign of someone who is not tethered or centered. So your goal as a foster parent is find yourself tethered so that you don't find yourself thrown all over the place. You can't do it. You will fail as a foster parent. You'll be exhausted by the time you get to stage 4, which is resolution. You say, I've had enough. I can't do this anymore. Because if every single time something goes good or something doesn't go well, you're thrown around by it, you're going to be exhausted. And foster parents that are in this stage, I can tell immediately, because they're going to every single court case. They are trying to get every piece of information from every single person, and they're trying to kind of get involved in the case. They're trying to affect the decisions that are made by the judges. I've seen folks in this situation get kind of crazy, and that's the most important thing I want to talk to you about. Don't get crazy. Don't do what's called going over to the dark side. This is very important. I say it seriously. Don't go to the dark side. What is the dark side? The dark side is where you get involved as a foster parent, and in the beginning of the case, you say to yourself, I just want what's in the best interest of this child, whether it be that they return home to parents, or whether it be that they go to a relative, or they stay with me. I just want what's in the best interest of the child. And somehow, over time, that morphs. And there are a lot of reasons for this. You start to fall in love with this child. You become bonded to this child. You can't imagine life without this child. And suddenly you find yourself talking about the best interests of the child, but what you're really talking about is the best interests of you. And suddenly the best interest of the child and the best interest of you have merged. This is a very dangerous place to be, because now we get into the mindset of the child just needs to be with me, and all the parents and relatives are just bad and people don't get it, or else maybe there's something sinister going on that they do get it, but they still want the child to go to somewhere terrible. And we start to get bitter and angry and frustrated, and sometimes we even start doing things that are kind of inappropriate, and sometimes really inappropriate. I've heard stories of foster parents who have fed their children excessively with a bottle right before they went to a visit, so they wouldn't take the mom's bottle or the mom's breast, so that the child looks like they're rejecting the mom, the biological mom, whereas in reality the foster parent has overfed the child on the way to that appointment. I've known of foster parents keeping kids up, keeping them awake right before an appointment so that they sleep through the visit with the parents. I've known of foster parents who've gone out and hired private investigators to try and investigate the claims that are made by the respondent attorney. This is the dark side. And the challenge with this is you find yourself doing some kind of crazy and inappropriate things because you have decided that the child's best interests are your best interests. And that's not necessarily so. And then when the time comes, there's two options here. Either the child goes home or with a relative, or the child stays with you. Let's take the second. The child stays with you. What happens in your own mind if the last 6 months to a year you've been doing everything you can to sabotage a biological parent from having their child? What is the guilt that comes with this? I had a very good friend say to me one time, his name was Wolfgang. He says, Ross, I don't know how to pray, because part of me wants to pray that this biological mom have a drug addiction, that she not be able to kick it, because I want this boy to stay with me. He said, I found myself praying for her demise. I found myself praying that at the next hearing I would hear about another failed UA. He says, and I found myself feeling very guilty and kind of evil about this, because how can you pray for somebody else's drug addiction to take over their lives so badly that they lose their children? He said, so I did just have to make a 180 in my mind and say, I just have to pray for the best thing for this child and that God's will be done. How guilty would you feel if you really, really personally prayed for and perhaps even sabotaged a mom's right, or her ability rather, to have a child in her life, for your child that is now in your home? Most of the time after kids are 18 to 21, they want to find their biological parents. You want that process to be a positive one for both you and your child and the biological parent. We can talk about that later. But that's a challenging situation, and it's a lot more challenging if you spent the last 18 years feeling guilty because you sabotaged that child's ability to go home. So don't do it. Don't go over the dark side. The other option is that perhaps as hard as you tried to keep the child with you, the child ends up being returned home or with a relative. Well, what we know is oftentimes that doesn't work. Oftentimes that placement failed because it was tenuous to begin with, and sometimes it's held together with chewing gum and rubber bands, so to speak, and when the child goes home it fails. Don't you want to be on good terms with that biological parent, and don't you want to be on good terms with all the members of the treatment plan so that when they have to look for another placement, they think about you? I've had a number of cases, and sometimes it's taken as much as 2 years, where the placement doesn't work and the biological parent says, I'm okay, I will actually relinquish my child voluntarily as long as they can go to the foster family they had last time. If you burn a bridge, if you foul the nest on the way out the door, you throw fits and do all the stuff I talked about on the dark side, guess what? They're not going to pick you. And the Department of Human Services isn't going to pick you because they have choices and they have that right. So you want to make sure that you don't go over the dark side. You want to be tethered and you want to be centered. What does it mean to be centered? Centered is very simple. understand that your happiness depends on one person and one person only, you. You can be happy in a miserable situation. You can be miserable in a perfect situation. I've known foster parents who have gone through a lot, and they've understood that their happiness resides within them and how they handle things, not in terms of outsiders and how they handle things. You do not want to be in a situation where your happiness is determined by how the courts operate. Your happiness is determined by the GAL, by the caseworker, by the therapist, by the CASA, by ICPC, an interstate compact, where they evaluate another family. You don't want to be waiting for those things to make you happy. Your only happiness comes from you and what's inside of you. Be centered, be tethered, and you'll survive the storm well. If you're not, you'll be so beat up by it. By the time you hit stage 4 of being a foster parent, that resolution of the case, you'll be bitter, you'll be angry, you'll be frustrated, and you won't want to do it again. The goal is to get through your first placement, get through all 4 stages, the pre-certification, the placement, the ongoing, and then the resolution, be able to reflect, refresh, and then return and do it again. Foster parents I've known that have been successful have had as many as 30 kids in their home. Somehow they ended up adopting a half dozen of them, and they're happy about the whole process. And they're able to see kids come and go without feeling beat up every single time it happened. So becoming centered, becoming tethered is critical. Now for tip number 5 on how to survive the foster parent life cycle. Know that you made a difference. Know that you've made a difference and you've changed a child's life, regardless of whether they stayed in your home for 1 day, 1 month, an entire year, or maybe half their lifetime. You changed the world. This is Ross Wright. We're talking about how to survive the foster parent life cycle. Have a good day.